So, the process of botanical printing, eco-dyeing is never a singular one. So one of the things I'm doing today while I am working on processing my Hopi black dye sunflower seeds is I am also working on creating a dye bath of Osage orange. So these are, let's see if I can fish some wood chips out. These are wood chips from the Osage orange trees here, known locally as hedge apple. And the wood can process into a beautiful golden and green colored dye. So I've been soaking these wood chips overnight in water to kind of soften them up and open up the dye properties to be available for simmering. So I've got these sitting on a double burner in my big galvanized boiler pot. And I need to keep an eye on this. I want it to simmer and not boil for about an hour to release color. And so let's see how we're doing. It's been simmering. It's not really at a full simmer yet, but it's starting to have a little bit of color. There are two ways to dye fibers. One is a special process called eco-printing without a mordant, where you don't use any artificial strikes on your fabric to help the dyes hold. But for this process that I'm doing this weekend, I am using a mordant, a chemical that helps the dyes to stay on the fibers so that they don't fade as quickly over time. And so I've also got going on, while I'm doing the dye pot, I'm also mordanting a whole tub of silk scarves in alum, pickling alum, basically the same kind of alum you use for making pickles. So I've strained the wood chips out of the Osage orange that soaked overnight and was simmering all day. And I've ended up with this really nice kind of chocolatey golden colored dye. And for botanical printing, instead of putting your fabric in there and cooking it, which is the traditional method, I'm actually using these flannel sheets, dye blankets, that I'm going to soak in this dye. And I have several of them here. And those will go on top of my scarf designs that I do tomorrow when I do my eco or botanical printing. Here's an old dye blanket. This used to be white and it's been dyed umpteen times, and you can see there are certain colors left on the dye blanket from previous episodes of dyeing. So these will soak in here overnight and they'll absorb. So getting ready to get the dye pots ready, adding water. There are two primary ways I do botanical printing. One way is steaming, which is what we're going to be doing today. When I use dye blankets, I steam the botanicals. The other way is immersion, where I actually create a stew of dye materials and I submerge the scarves or the clothing. This one was made by submerging it into a dye pot that was full of different colors, iron, eucalyptus, onion skin, and so on. And then I layered the plant material. And you get this kind of dreamy, nuanced effect. Whereas when we do botanical printing with a steam method, where you use a dye blanket on top to impart the color on the background of the plant material, you end up with a much more vivid, almost photographic look if it's been wrapped correctly. But so today that's the one we're doing. So we've got two dye pots ready to go, so I can alternate dyeing, and I'll leave the extra water here because as the day goes on, the water will evaporate. And we're gonna go out next and begin collecting our plant material for dyeing. So we've got our dye pots started warming so that by the time we get back, hopefully they'll be boiling and ready to accept the scarves that we're going to be dyeing today. I've got my basket and my clippers, and we're just going to walk our path and see what we want to have for our scarves today. I've got some plant material here. You can see some flowers here. I've got flowers along my studio. I usually get those last, obviously, since I don't need to carry those all the way around the loop with us. But it's really nice to have a series of different colors and textures that I can glean from. But right now, the prairie is absolutely ideal, and we're really lucky. This is the middle of August, and it's in the 60s, which is pretty much unheard of in Kansas. This is definitely part of the global weirding that we all have been hearing about. But it makes for a nice day for gathering plant material. So we'll start heading down the path and see what we find for the day. So the other things that we work with are, in addition to the plants that we've planted, like the heirloom sunflowers, the Hopi black dye sunflowers, and the cosmos, which we'll get to in a minute. There's a forest of cosmos. I also go out into our tiny patch of tallgrass prairie. We, my husband Dave Kendall and I, have designated our place a Kansas agritourism site. And we let people by appointment come and walk our land because we have a small patch here, just a few acres of unspoiled tallgrass prairie. And so these plants and flowers and grasses that are growing out here are part of the ecosystem that have been here for thousands of years. Given that, I like to be very careful about what I harvest from here, and I pay attention. Sometimes people will ask me, hey, can I pick plants on your land? You have such pretty flowers and so on. And my answer, sadly, is always no. And the reason is not that I'm trying to be greedy, but I am very cautious and thoughtful about what I actually take from the prairie and what things I leave. For example, these are partridge pea. They are a beautiful botanical printer that I find are really consistent and make beautiful color on paper and fabric. And if you look out to this prairie, all that yellow you see, most of it anyway, is partridge pea. I have an abundance of this. I can harvest really with abandon, and it's not going to cause any problems. However, on the other hand, this is another extraordinary printer. Purple top prairie grass. It is one of the few printers that actually comes out the color that it is. You see that beautiful purple color? That's the color that prints on paper and fabric. But if you look at this, there's just a very few. There's a little patch here. There's one plant over there. I have very little of this on the land. And so consequently, I do harvest this, but very judiciously. I don't just wholesale cut a bunch of it because it needs to seed and establish a better community here. We have right now, if you look over here, this really odd little patch of grass that's kind of flopped over. This is called gamma grass. And this is not something that we planted. This came up spontaneously, and it's a wonderful indicator. From a couple of people who know prairie told me it's a wonderful indicator of a healthy prairie. That's the only one that we have. So I really don't do anything with that. I want to let that just continue to deepen and spread its seeds before I experiment with that grass very much. So there's always a balance between stewardship, harvesting, and ecology that one has to be very mindful of. And because we have such a small patch, I have tended to memorize where things are and what's growing and what we don't have much of and what we have an abundance of. And that would be very hard for me to convey easily to other people. So for now, anyway, I'm the only one that harvests here for botanical printing. One other thing is words of warning. This is also a beautiful printer. This is ragweed. And ragweed prints beautifully, but the steam, if you are sensitive to ragweed, the steam can really be afflictive for your eyes. Several years ago, as I had this in the dye pot and I lifted the lid off the dye pot, I got a face full of ragweed steam, and it swelled my eyes shut. And I had to go to the emergency room and get some steroids and anti-inflammatories to help me see again. So I've learned to be very cautious about what I harvest. You should always know what plants you're using. There are some that are poisonous. This is not poisonous, but it can be an irritant. So if I work with this, and I'm not going to today, but if I were to harvest this, I'm always very cautious about opening that dye pot to avoid getting it in my eyes, that steam. We also have these beautiful prairie grasses. So I picked just a little bit of this and that to help provide a nice variety for our scarves. So these are compass plant. These are also good printers, I've discovered. We have good patches of this in several places on our land, and they have a really lovely look when you print these. So we'll bring a few of those along, especially because they're kind of gone beyond. They're starting to fall over. Look at all this. Big blue stem. It's gorgeous. We'll take just a couple. Sumac is an invasive on the prairie, and it can really choke out the prairie. But it also is an extraordinary printer. So we try, in the way that we manage our land here, we do seasonal burning, and we burn the center of the field so that they don't get an overgrowth of the sumac, which will choke out all the prairie diversity. But we do leave some on the outer woody edges, and you can see it comes up even underneath this tree canopy. Bottle brush. Illinois bundleflower. Interestingly, this one section of the prairie is the only place on our land where this grows, and it grows in abundance, but just along this one corridor. I don't know why. I find that really fascinating. It's a really spectacular printer. Also, when it dries, the seeds become hard and brown, and they're absolutely beautiful in dried flower arrangements too. But when they're fresh, they make really good printers. So here is just a little patch of goldenrod, but again, part of the yellow in this field is goldenrod. We have a really good mixture of goldenrod and partridge pea, so there's plenty of it for me to take some, and goldenrod is an extraordinary printer. It's one that you can do that's called printing without a mordant, meaning I don't need to put anything on the yarn or the fabric or the paper to keep the dye vibrant. Goldenrod has its own mordanting process. It has a lot of tannins in it, apparently. So I'm going to take a little of this right at the edge here, which is in danger of getting knocked away during our mowing anyway, to add to our plant materials. And so the next thing on the list is I have some glass jars that I fill with water because I'll be using these all day, and I'll probably go out and get more. But what I like to do to keep them fresh is I use just a couple of vases with water in them, and I sort them by type. I put prairie grasses in one and flowering plants in another. So I'm just going to set these in here. I'll have several of these going for the day, and that will let me pick my designs for my botanical print scarves with intentionality if I've got them kind of separated out and organized. So I've laid this dye blanket out in a vertical design. So it's designed to be hung vertically versus horizontally. And you can see the different plant materials. There's a few from my garden, but by and large, most of this are prairie flowers. That partridge pea that we have in abundance here. We have some goldenrod, some of the purple top prairie grass, the giant heritage sunflowers from the garden, and then just a few of these other ones are from the garden, the cosmos, of course. Illinois bundle flower, that's from the prairie. So we'll be curious to see, and I believe this is a plant called tick tree foil, which has these beautiful little orchid-like plants, and some aster, also from the prairie. So we'll see what it does. We're gonna lay a Osage orange dye blanket, which should give kind of a light creamy tan color when it's done. The Osage orange dye blanket that we made with those wood chips. I'm gonna center it over the piece, give a little overhang.
Yes.
I do too. All right, 1, 2, 3, we're gonna drop it right down on. And lay my resist on top. Recycled plastic. There we go. Again, these pieces are of course going, oh, and I can feel there's something poking up right there. It's probably a sunflower. Yeah, that flattened it some. Now I'm going to do the same. I'm going to roll this with a rolling pin just to really adhere everything and smush it down. And I'm tucking in. I've got a few prairie pieces escaping, like the aster. Ooh, something crunched there. Now what I don't mind is you'll see there's a little bit of purple flower poking out here and a leaf here. I kind of like that. There are some pieces that I've done in the past, there's one up above there, that showcases those pieces of plant material peeking out from the dye blanket, and I really like that look. I think it's really pretty. All right. This is, as always, the hard part. You really want to make good contact. This is a much wider blanket than one I did earlier today, so it's a little harder to roll it perfectly evenly on the stick. Really using a lot of tension. Fold these ends in on itself. That'll hold this. This is a slightly bigger piece, as I mentioned, and keeping the edges from hitting are kind of important. All right. And I just switch sides, no particular reason other than I get tired. This is a lot of muscle that you have to do this to get a really good contact. And so if I get tired of rolling one way, I just flip to the other way. And I have to go clear to the end because this dye blanket and this scarf are about 15 inches wide, which is about how big that stick was. So I want to make sure to get good contact on the whole thing. I use a lot more string than other people that I see online, but I think you have to have good contact, and if I don't have this much string wrapping, I don't feel like I get as good a contact. I'm going to tie it to the beginning end. And this is ready for the dye pot, 2 hours. I think this will make it 2 hours. What I'm noticing is this is really boiled down quite a bit. I think it's going to last, but I need to keep an eye on that water. I may need to boil some water and add to it just to be safe, so I'll go in and do that next. And we'll look at it in 2 hours. And the one we're pulling out here is the Osage orange dye blanket. I've got one more in here. That's just flowers. That's going to come out at about an hour and a half from now. This part is always a little like Christmas. I should probably wait for it to cool, but I never can. I just start unwinding and I'm going to let that, you can see the steam coming off that. We're going to let that cool for just a sec. So here we are. Let me put this over here to dry. We'll see. Oh, look at that nice golden Osage orange. That's a really golden color. Lovely. Gotta use something. This is too hot. You can see the steam coming off. And again, I'm going to pull the plastic out. Put that off to the side. So we have the great reveal. Wow, look at that. That is one of those Hopi sunflower seed leaves, the giant leaves from that plant. Just, ooh, got some colors here. This is the partridge pea. This is some sumac that was out there on the outside. It's a little milkweed, I think. Oh, look at that. Sunflower really came out good. Look at that. It's a lovely one. Wondering if that was a different kind of flower. It doesn't really look like a sunflower. This is the ironweed, and you can see that really was dark purple. Clean this off later. It's going to take some time. But look at the purple top prairie grass, see? Look at that. Look at that vivid purple. That is stunning. This. I think this one worked out. I'll have to clean some of the pieces off, but we've got some really beautiful colors here. Yeah, I don't think that's a sunflower. I think that's actually a flower from my flower garden. That color does not look like a sunflower. That is a sunflower right there. See that blue one we've got? That's a sunflower. Let's see how this cosmos did. Oh, look at that. Beautiful. That cosmos came out just beautiful. All right, so this is gonna just be rinsed off. See some of this plant material, particularly these leaves, are kind of disintegrated on there, so I'll wash those off. But look at how lovely this is. I think this really has a nice, and this is a vertical. You can see I did the design so that you can display it this way. I think it came out pretty darn good.